Njuguna and Ndung'u. Let's listen into that.
So, who is coordinating? I don't. Who was coordinating? Is it coordinating? Who was coordinating?
Yeah, it's okay. We are here. You can start.
Don't understand what he means by start.
No,
what am I starting?
You just give them the brief, the budget brief.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me after talking for perhaps 3 hours. You can may fail. So thank you very much, and maybe we will concentrate more on questions because I covered everything very comprehensively. But let me say that I want to welcome you and to welcome your questions. I'm very happy that we have delivered the first Kenya Kwanza budget. It's also the first budget that is coming under bottom-up economic transformation agenda, which is quite important for us as a bottom-up economic transformation agenda. And I would like to emphasize to you what is it, what are the highlights that we anticipate that we are coming informing this budget. And one of them is, what are the policy priorities of the bottom-up economic transformation agenda? Of course, that is also informed by the kind of economic challenges that we have come from in the last 8 months or so. And that economic context is very, very important because it is the one that has driven the economic recovery agenda. The bottom-up economic transformation agenda, part of that is actually economic recovery program. And the second part of it is to say, how do we resuscitate and correct the structural effects that have come from sustained multiple shocks? The third dimension for this is actually to look at the policy and legal institutional reforms that will underpin and support bottom-up economic transformation agenda. We have highlighted most of those, and that for me is very, very important. But of course, you cannot have all those policies and proposals and propositions in one budget. It means it's a continuing space that we have to look at. We have to look at that continuing space. We start off with the recovery. What measures do we need now for the economic recovery? The second thing is, how do we need to ignite institutional reforms that will sustain that recovery? And then the third one is, how do we create that momentum? More importantly, those are legal and institutional reforms that will be required. But more importantly, we have also looked at the legal framework, the fiscal framework that should support better. On one side, we have constraints in terms of financing, but on the other hand, we also have borrowing constraints. So in a sense, we're asking ourselves, how do we optimize the better priorities, even given those constraints? That's why you found that we are very, very we touched briefly on revenue-raising measures, but also made sure that we rationalize even the tax proposals that we put in. And the other one is actually resource allocation. That's a very, very important. The most important thing that will come back to us all the time is that we focus impact. It means that once we have that large impact, that we did not prioritize, even though we supported them. That's one aspect you should remember, so that you don't say, why did you focus on 5 sectors? What about the others? The first thing is that you want economic recovery. The second stage, you want that recovery to be sustained. So that is where you'll need other sectors plus institutional and policy and institutional reforms. That will be very, very critical. And of course, after that, we want now to say, how else can we do better in terms of that? I want to refocus so much because most of the avenues that we raise, for example, the housing project, is going to be very, very important in raising jobs. What are the most serious constraints that we face? Poverty is one aspect. Cost of living is part of that. But actually raising or creating jobs for the youth is very, very critical. So essentially, we have taken more time. If you read, and you're going to get this press briefing, we have taken more time to look at the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. We want it to be understood. Wherever you are, whichever sector you are, you should know the importance of the sector that you're reading. We want to showcase why we are emphasizing on those sectors and why we are emphasizing on bottom-up economic transformation agenda is because it's very critical for us. That's why we have gone from human capital to jobs creation and to poverty reduction. And the third aspect of it is that climate change is going to be very, very important for us. How do we take advantage of climate change and taking advantage of climate finance, for example? How do we resuscitate our food sector? Because I think the devastating consequences of food security and climate change was actually devastating. It's something that we can write a lot of stories about that, but we know that we need to deal with that. And after that, we have gone into specific. For example, agricultural transformation for inclusive growth is very, very important. Transformation of MSMEs, micro and small enterprises, to support the economy, that sector is very, very important. It houses most of the people. It can create jobs. And for us, that becomes extremely important in all the aspects that we do, in all the areas that we cover. You'll find startups in IT, those are still in MSMEs. You'll find them in agricultural sector, those are still MSME. Housing and settlement, again, we have argued the strong impact in terms of pulling the economy with you, and all those enhanced digital superhighway. Let me talk about why are we emphasizing value chain. Value chain for us is very, very important. We want to make sure along the value chain you can see the end product. You can see the end product, and then in the process you want to go back to the value chain and see whether you have funded all the stages of that value chain. There should be no gaps in terms of resource allocation. There should be no duplication, so that somehow, somewhere, nothing happened because you are waiting for another institution to take up. So that is very, very critical. So in the end, what are we really trying to say? We are actually trying to support the markets, both the markets of the intermediate products and the market of the final product. The moment you support markets, then you know that you can ignite production and productivity. When you support markets, what you see downstream is increased production and productivity, because it is in the marketplace that we see economic land being shared and distributed. So for us, that is very, very important. So when you look at the markets, then it means that you are going to produce what the markets want and you can sell. And secondly, you can increase productivity. So when you look at markets functioning, when markets are properly functioning, then you ignite production and increase productivity. And then what you look at the markets, when you look up, you see increased income for you as a producer. So that's why we kept on emphasizing so many of those sectors, because at the end of those sectors and even their performance is actually very, very important to see the functioning of markets. And after that, it is how to safeguard and to make sure that that is actualized. I think we have copies of this for the media, or which? Huh? We have. What do we have? Oh, we have a beta version. Oh, we have we have prepared them.
We have sent this already.
Oh, this is sent already, which is a summary. So I think what I can do is maybe take a few questions. Make sure that the questions are focused. Don't go. Yeah. The reliance on.
And then, just a question: what's the worst that can happen if MPs fail to approve these discussions? Are we going to default debt
So by the time when I want to answer your question, sometimes it's to educate you, because no, forgive me, because we did not change anything, isn't it? We are actually saying, like all other countries internationally, best practice is have a debt anchor. It's just like we have inflation target, isn't it? The role of inflation target is to show you, at any one point you can say, what is the inflation rate today? You know the inflation, I mentioned it, isn't it? It's 8%, isn't it? From the previous month. From the target, it should be 5%. Within a range of 7.5%, isn't it? So in a sense, what we have is a policy. Inflation should be a target 5%, but you have a policy that it should be in the range of 2.5% to 7.5%, isn't it? It is the same strategy for debt, that we say that we should have a debt anchor at 55%, but then from a policy perspective and operationalization of that policy, we should have a range. Now for you, when you look at it, you can tell where is Kenya in relation to the debt anchor. So you can say, oh, it is above 55%, isn't it? So it means its debt carrying capacity needs to reduce. Or suppose it is below 55%, its debt carrying capacity is telling that it can increase the debt, isn't it? So the whole issue, first of all, in terms of law, you cannot default on debt, on public debt in Kenya, isn't it? Do you know that? That's why I said I need to educate you a bit, because that is clear. It has the first charge. But what we want to do is we want to create an information platform that wherever you are, you can see that the National Treasury is moving towards liability management to reduce the debt carrying capacity, because it is already over-indebted. Or it is trying to borrow more because that it is below its debt carrying capacity. If you make an assumption that you are actually provisioning debt to finance public investments, mostly the public goods type of investment, then it is important that you can take them up. So essentially, it's a policy. We are defining a clear-cut policy that you can look at objectively even yourself. You'll be asking, just like you objectively, you can say inflation is high today. Why is it high? It is above the 7.5%, isn't it? Suppose inflation was 2%. What would you say? Inflation is slow. It means that the central bank has an option to expand monetary policy, isn't it? The converse of contracting monetary policy is when it is at 8%. It is the same principle. But what are we doing? We are trying to give policy flexibility. You have a policy space. The parliament may tell us, okay, the debt anchor is 55, but we are going to give you an operating range of between 50 and 60%, isn't it? That's an operational range. That's a policy range. It gives you policy flexibility. Okay. The final point, the point that you made about domestic, we are going to rely on domestic debt. We have, everywhere we go, there is a market for debt, isn't it? Our bond market is a market for debt. And that debt can be sold. The private sector can sell its debt in that market, isn't it? So there's nothing wrong with the debt. If you sit with me one day, I will tell you growing with the debt, and I can refer you to my own literature on growing with the debt in African economies. You can find it in Journal of African Economies. Okay? Growing with the debt is an established concept, starting from the Marshall Plan, isn't it? So there's nothing wrong with incurring debt. The most important thing is, did you get value? Did you provide public goods? And then, because all of us are going to pay the public debt, it means we have to benefit from the debt that was in. We have to benefit from the investment that was made with debt. So we are crossing the gap in terms of capital accumulation by borrowing to provide debt. We need the infrastructure for us to lower transactions cost and invest in private sector, isn't it? But the government cannot roll out those investments. What do? We buy. So debt market is a market. Okay, yeah.
Right, Bonasi is Jimmy Bogo from KTN. Now, you spoke about a revenue target for ordinary revenue of about 2.9 trillion, which 2.53 is going to recurrent expenditure. So, in essence, you're telling us is that we have a budget that is going to be financed through appropriation in aid and borrowing. Maybe you can just help us understand what is happening, because if revenue majority of it is going back to recurrent expenditure, then what are we going to fund the budget in terms of development with?
But the debt, we categorized in two components. There's recurrent cost, there is development, isn't it? That's what we did. And then we said, how is it financed? So I don't think I get your question, because unless you didn't get the components, all the components were there. What we did was to say that if there is the revenue gap was going to be financed by borrowing internationally and borrowing domestically, isn't it? But the components were all given. The recurrent expenditures, the development expenditures, isn't it? So I don't know why your question now, because all those components were there.
And again, the other thing.
Now, do you get my point? Because there is the current expenditure, there is development expenditure. Then the whole issue is, how is it financed? Okay? we finance with the current revenue, which is you're getting from tax revenue. And the second one is you are also borrowing internationally. There is appropriations in aid, but also you're borrowing domestically and internationally. Borrowing domestically or internationally is what I have described as debt market. So because you have to bridge the gap between your savings and your resources, isn't it? That's what happens. That's what I'm saying. But there is development expenditure and there is recurrent expenditure. We do believe, even in times of crisis, and this is something that I've said for many years in Kenya, even in times of crisis, you have to protect development spending so that you have capacity for future growth. If you don't protect development spending, then you miss out capacity for future growth. That is maybe the component that you wanted me to bring out. Yes.
Africa takes the biggest hit, yet contributes the least to that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your first question. We have rationalized, and I spent a bit of time trying to show that we're trying to close the gap on the supplies in the domestic market and the demand, and why cost escalation has come in. So most of the products, I don't know why you specifically focus on some, most of the products like maize, for example, we don't have the supply. We know the season will come, isn't it? But for now, for us to lower the cost of living, we had to bring in supplies. Those supplies must come duty-free because the impact itself will be reduced. And that is why the essence. Oh, okay. I was facing the guy who asked the question. Can you tell him to go there? No, I'm joking. No. So the essence of importation duty-free is actually to resolve the supply. Why do we want to do that? Because most of the time you have supply constraints, then the scarcity value kicks in. Scarcity value means the prices, domestic prices rise, isn't it? We are complaining about cost of living, isn't it? So that is one avenue of saying, in the short term, let us import duty-free so that we lower the cost. We bring in the supplies in the market, we lower the cost while we wait for our season to come through. That's very, very important. The second question you have asked is very, very important. Don't forget we have environment summit under His Excellency the President. That is going to be in September. So it means that we are slowly coming to formalize. And don't forget also, we have really emphasized a lot of climate finance kind of propositions, and what is happening, the development in this area is becoming very, very important. So in a sense, as we build towards, and let's say, the carbon market, the carbon credit market is working very well. We are actually trying to formalize, because before that there were informal markets that are not really working very well. So we have a big chance to really formalize this market. One of them is to make sure that we go back into our mitigation and adaptation because of the climate, the severity of the climate. In fact, there is nobody in Kenya who can now deny the severity of the climate change. But then how do we benefit from that climate action now that the markets are reforming themselves? So in a sense, as we build up towards September 4th to 6th in the summit, we really want to see how we can actually formalize that market. It will become a very important market for us. And that is something that we want to build on. There are others who are queuing for you.
My name is from K24, layman in finances. My question is, how certain are you that there are going to be adequate revenue
the budget. Other people are saying it's too ambitious. It's just an opinion. But according to you, considering the hard economic times that everyone is facing, businesses are not doing quite well. You also consider the aftermath of the corona. How certain are you going to do this?
Taxation is generated from economic activity. Period, isn't it? You don't need to know even that. You're saying you are ignorant, but you see, you pay taxes because you are having business. Business is running. Our analysis and projections are showing that the economic recovery will be coming soon. That's why we start with showing what is the growth trajectory, isn't it? We start by showing what is the growth path and which sectors are giving us that growth path. Okay? It is on the basis of that then you say, because economic activity is going to produce revenue through taxation, that's the only way you can start projecting other things. So in a sense, there is a lot of analysis that has been done. First of all, if you listen to the debate carefully, we started by showing how much is the growth expected, isn't it? What is growth to you? It's a series of a summary of economic activity. And if it's a summary of economic activity, it means that those economic activities are generating some value addition, some value added, isn't it? And so they are taxable. So we start from there. So if our analysis showed that growth in next year will be negative, then we cannot be sure about the revenue that we are raising. But we are now sure about the growth trajectory. And if we continue with that growth trajectory, we are talking about economic vibrancy. And so it means that we are going to generate the resources that we actually need, the tax resources that we actually need. So tell your friend who says that it is ambitious, we started with the growth. If next year the growth is not 5.8%, it's 10%, we will also change our targets. So we start from estimating and analyzing what is the growth prospects. And then after that, because the growth is a summary of economic activity or a summary of economic activities that are coming from value addition, then you can project on the tax revenue. Yes. Asante sana kwa hiyo maswali. Umeuliza maswali mengi, lakini wacha niseme kwanza, for me to explain the bottom-up economic transformation agenda is first of all to understand that we want to make sure that tunasaidia ule Mkenya ako chini sana. Umeshaona na Hustler Fund, si ndio? Hustler Fund imemsaidia, anaweza kupata kiasi ya pesa, anaweza kulipa na ile the affordable interest. The most important aspect of the foundation of economic transformation agenda is to make sure that we are focusing on those people who are the majority but are are at the bottom of the pyramid. It means that if we make a well-being or we promote policies that are going to create their well-being, it means that they have a larger impact because they are more and they are going to support us in terms of economic emancipation. So we do know that it is not we have to have the pillars for growth. That is why when we argued about bottom-up economic transformation, we focused on the sectors that have the largest impact. Who are those in those sectors? Some of them is the bottom of the pyramid, and that is why we are very anxious in terms of the bottom-up economic policy, bottom-up economic transformation policies that are going to support and aid this. Watu kina vijana wanatarajia kupata kupata kazi, si ndio? I think there's a very serious mistake from your own conception, because a debt level cannot be a measure of development, because it all depends on what you do with the debt. Let's not confuse two things which are they are not moving target, but they are not conclusive. The debt is accumulated for you to support public goods or investments in public goods. That is why we need to do that, isn't it? But if you are looking at debt as an indicator of who was good or bad, that is not a very good approach. And if you are from the media, I need to sit with you to try and bring you up to speed. It all depends on what you did with the debt, isn't it? All of us will pay the debt. But if you are told that that debt built that dam has provided irrigation, and those people in the irrigation are producing, it means that they are raising resources that they can service the debt, isn't it? That is how it works, okay? But that is not the way. But let me say, we want to provide jobs. Lazima tupatie vijana wetu kazi. Lazima tuwasaidie na kujiendelesha. Lazima to support our education system, to build our human capital development. Hizo ndizo tumeamukia kusema hii bottom up economic better itasaidia vijana. Yeah. You have been talking for 3.5 hours, and you are thank you is to be there. No, we can have discussions, because I have to bring you to speed, so that when even when you talk with my colleagues here, you have to have a level. We have to have a level of convergence. Why? Because the story you write tomorrow has to have a level of convergence, that you understood the content, and you can actually even use it tomorrow to say, yes, I understood this content, but what are we doing now? How are we supporting that? That is the idea. That is the kind of conversation I would like to have. The conversation I would like to have with you is that you understand what I tell you. It's not a question and answer and then you go away. But you have to understand what I tell you, so that tomorrow we catch up with the story, isn't it? The second thing is that, why did you need policy reform? Because you saw policy reform is going to drive this development. That is what we didn't need to do. It's not just for the sake. Thank you so much.
Asanteni sana. Asanteni sana. We can go. The speaker is waiting.